It's good to see you all. I'm excited to have an open conversation with you. We don't do that enough in this country anymore, actually. There's no social media algorithms in the air between us right now, I promise. No TV screens. I think the thing that's happened in this country is we have this culture of fear that is spread across this country like an epidemic. And that culture of fear has totally replaced our culture of free speech in this country. I often say this, what is the best measure of our country's health? How are we doing? Is it the number of green pieces of paper in our bank account? Is it the number of ballots we cast every November? I don't think so. The best measure of our country's health is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. Right now, we're doing poorly. And the only way we're going to do better is by all of us, not just me, every single one of us starting to speak the truth in the open again. The hallmark of this campaign is standing for truth. You see some of that laid out in the pamphlets we give out at these events. And I thought we'd do things a little bit differently today. Maybe I'd just walk through that a little bit and tell you what each of those 10 truths mean to me. And then I want to open this up and have a conversation with you all. First on the list, it's the most important one to me. God is real. God has become a 4-letter word in our culture, and it shouldn't be. We should be able to talk about faith and family in the open. I think that part of what's happened in this country is we've lost our faith in God, a belief in something bigger than ourselves. Now, I want to tell you about my faith, especially because I know that's sometimes a question that comes up at the events, which is great. I'm Hindu. It's a little different than people who've usually run for president. But I went to Christian schools. I went to St. Xavier in Cincinnati. And I can tell you from that experience with confidence that we share the same value set in common. I'll tell you about my faith. My parents instilled it in me, and I'm grateful to them for it. I left faith altogether probably in my late teenage years, in my early 20s, came back to it in my adulthood. My faith teaches me that God puts each of us here for a purpose, that we have a moral duty to realize that purpose, that God works through us in different ways, but we're all equal because God resides in each of us. That's what my faith teaches me. My parents gave us a very traditional upbringing around that, very traditional by today's standards at least. They taught us that family is the foundation. Marriage is sacred. It's between a man and a woman. That divorce isn't just some option you prefer. That abstinence before marriage is the way to go. That there's more to life than the aimless passage of time. The good things in life involve a sacrifice. That's what my parents taught me. Now, those seem like foreign values today, in today's culture. If you go to the movie theater, go to DEI training at your mega company, go to a movie theater or watch television at home. They don't have to be foreign values, though. Those are the same values this country was founded on. Look at the 10 Commandments. There's one true God. Don't take his name in vain. Observe the Sabbath. Respect your parents. Don't lie. Don't cheat. Don't steal. Don't covet. Don't commit adultery. These don't have to be strange and foreign values. They're the same value set that I was raised in, the same value set that this country was founded on. And we talk about often in my faith, the teaching is we don't choose who God works through. God chooses who God works through. That's the teaching in the book of Isaiah. God chose Cyrus all the way in Persia to lead the Jews back to the promised land. So, yes, when I say God is real, I think it's my responsibility as a young person. I'm 38. I'm the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican, to make faith and family and patriotism cool in this country. Number 2 relates closely to that. There are 2 genders. I never thought this was going to be something that we had to say, but here we are. And what happened is it actually relates to number 1. When you stop believing in the real thing, you start subscribing to new religions instead. Transgenderism has become a new religion in America. LGBTQIA, there's so many letters, they just put a little plus at the end. And in the name of protecting against a tyranny of the majority, what we've created in this country is a new tyranny of the minority in the United States. That's what's going on. The same religion that said that the sex of the person you're attracted to is hardwired on the day you're born. It had to be that way for gay rights to count as civil rights. Now says that your own biological sex is completely fluid over the course of your life. You can't believe these two things at the same time if you're operating according to logic, but you can if you're subscribing to a religion. I won't even call it a religion, I'll call it a cult. Religions have withstood the test of time, cults have not. So there are two genders. Number 3 relates to this too. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. That's just a fact right now and for the foreseeable future in this country and in the modern world. But what is causing this assault on fossil fuels, where they're stopping us from drilling or fracking or using coal, calling on America to abandon our modern way of life? It is this climate cult in the United States of America. Again, it is a substitute for religion. That's what's going on. The same people, if it was about logic, I could tell you all kinds of hypocrisies. The same people who are against carbon emissions in the United States are fine shifting them to China. The same people who are against carbon emissions are also oddly against nuclear energy, the greatest form of carbon-free energy production known to man. So again, if you're applying logic, these two things don't make sense. But if you're subscribing to a quasi-religious cult, that's what this climatism movement is, then you can believe these things. So these things all follow. God is real. When you stop believing that, you bend the knee to transgenderism, to climatism. To number 4, reverse racism is racism. Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of the Squad, she famously said, "We don't want any more black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't want any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice," end quote. Now, I don't fit her description of what counts as a brown voice, but there's something deeper there. It says that when your voice goes from being about your skin color goes from being about your shade of melanin, your appearance, to being about the content of the ideas you're allowed to have, then any disagreement with those ideas automatically makes you a racist. And there's no greater damnation in modern America than to be called a racist. So when given the choice between pledging allegiance to this new religion or being tarred with that scarlet R, everyday Americans are choosing to bend the knee. Well, you know what? Reverse racism is racism. And that's why I've said we're going to end affirmative action and racial quota systems in every area of American life. It is divisive. It is anti-meritocratic. It is anti-American. That's why I've said we're going to put an end to it. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is not a border. Again, one of these things I would have never imagined we actually have to acknowledge. But it's part of our self-loathing in the United States that we now say that if you don't have a border, that means you're xenophobic. That means you're racist. It means you're bigoted. No. I say this as the kid of legal immigrants who came to this country. Your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. And that is why I've said that as your next president, we will use our own military to secure our own southern border and our northern border too. That's what it means to stand for the rule of law in the United States of America. That shouldn't be controversial. That's common sense. Number 6, parents determine the education of their children. I say this as the father of 2 sons myself. My parents came to this country 40 years ago with no money. In a single generation, I've gone on to found multiple multi-billion-dollar companies. Part of the foundation that my parents gave to me, I didn't grow up in money, but I grew up in a 2-parent household with a focus on education. That's the ultimate gift, the ultimate privilege. They like to use that word, privilege, these days. Well, I had that privilege, and I'm proud of it, but I want every kid in this country to enjoy that privilege. Yet today we have a U.S. Department of Education that's using $80 billion of our taxpayer money to tell local schools they can't adopt these racial, they have to adopt these racial or gender ideologies or else they don't get that money. Here's what I'm going to do as U.S. president. For so many of those agencies, we're going to do it for the U.S. Department of Education as well. We will get in there and shut it down and return $80 billion back to parents across this country so you can choose where you send your kids to school. And you know what? I want the public schools to compete. Get rid of the teachers' unions. That allows the public schools to compete. Now you got transparency, you got choice. If you're going to teach it in the classroom, put it on the internet. If you don't want to put it on the internet, that means you probably shouldn't be teaching it in the classroom. And then let's revive real civic education in this country, where every kid who graduates from 12th grade should have to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass in order to become a voting citizen of this country. You got to know something about a country. That's where our educational system is failing our children, but it starts with parental choice. Parents determine the education of their children. Number 7, the nuclear family. It's a bad word you're not supposed to talk about. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. That was the ultimate privilege. Every great society ever built, all the way back to Aristotle, the government is small compared to actually the real form of governance, which is the household. Today, 25% of kids are born in a house without a father or are raised in a house without a father. In black communities across this country, it's closer to 45%. If you grow up in a household without a father, you're 8 times more likely to end up in poverty. Over 10 times more likely to end up in jail or not to graduate from high school. And the worst part is, we have a government that is now using our taxpayer money to pay single mothers more money not to have a man in the house than to have a man in the house. We're paying for that. Lyndon Johnson's so-called Great Society has hurt the very people it was supposed to help. Back in the 1950s, black fatherlessness was much smaller, much lower than it is today. You get what you pay for. Well, you know what? On my watch, as your next president, we will stop using our taxpayer money to pay people to do the exact opposite of what's best for them. Paying people more money not to have a married man in the house than to have a married man in the house. More money not to go to work instead of to go to work. More money not to repay your student loans than to repay your student loans. More money effectively. I went to Kensington, the inner city of Philadelphia. For drug addicts, they're given crack pipes and needles instead of actually getting people off drugs. That ends on my watch. We will stop wasting our taxpayer money on not only anti-family policies, but destructive policies that are hurting the very people they're supposed to help. There are capitalism. I want to start with this one too. Capitalism is the best known system to mankind to lift us up from poverty. We're taught to apologize for that today. I don't. I got ahead in this country by building businesses. My first business was a business that developed medicines. 5 of them are FDA approved today. The one I'm most proud of is a life-saving therapy in kids. 20 kids a year are born with a genetic disease where 100% of those kids die by the age of 3. We worked on a therapy where 70% of those kids now are able to live lives of normal duration. I'm proud of that. That's how I built a multi-billion-dollar company and live a life today that my parents would have never imagined for our family when they came to this country 40 years ago. My wife, Apurva, is a physician. She's a throat surgeon taking care of cancer survivors at Ohio State. She's living her version of the American dream. Capitalism is not just about making money for yourself. In fact, many of the procedures she does, she helps people who haven't swallowed food for years. She's one of the few people in the country that does the procedure that allows those cancer survivors to eat food again. Our healthcare system is so broken. We don't have a healthcare system. We have a sick care system. It is so broken that it'll pay for all kinds of pill pushing and all kinds of other things, feeding tubes, but it doesn't often pay for the one set of procedures that help these patients. She does it without getting paid in many cases, and that's okay. Thankfully, we've lived the American dream. That works for our family, but that's how broken our crony capitalism is. So capitalism is the best system known to man to lift us up from poverty, but crony capitalism is not. That's why we have the healthcare system, or the lack of healthcare system that we do today, because pharmaceutical industries have lobbied for the closure of mental health institutions. Health insurance companies have lobbied for special antitrust exemptions. That ends on my watch. I have no patience for crony capitalism. From the 2008 bailouts, which happened under a Republican administration, all the way to the capture of politicians, which we see today. And I'm not a politician, I'm a businessman, but I can tell you, you think it's going to be ugly when you get into politics. I knew it was going to be ugly. I was wrong, actually. It was far worse than I ever imagined. Every one of these politicians is dancing to the tune of their biggest donor. And in my case, that biggest donor is me. And that's why I'm not somebody else's circus monkey. So I reject crony capitalism. You know, crony capitalism, I'll give you an example. Anybody familiar here with this carbon capture pipeline that's going through this state we're in right now? If you're familiar with that? That's crony capitalism. That's not capitalism. That's the federal government providing subsidies to people who want to capture carbon dioxide from ethanol plants. I love ethanol. That doesn't mean you got to love capturing carbon dioxide from an ethanol plant. Building a pipeline across the state to bury it in the ground in North Dakota for what? So some other guy can make another million or billion while they're using eminent domain to build pipelines across the land of innocent farmers who don't want that built across their land, sensibly so, because they've had leaks in Mississippi that have sent actually an entire town or a good portion of an entire town to a hospital. No, that's not the way we do things. That's not capitalism. That's crony capitalism. But true capitalism, if we practice it, is still the best system known to man to lift us up from poverty. It's number 8. Number 9. We have 3 branches of government in the United States, not 4. Well, here's the dirty little secret in American politics today. The people who we elect to run the government, they're no longer the ones who actually run the government. That's the truth. It's the shadow government in the deep state, those 3-letter agencies. They're the ones pulling the strings today. The war I'm going to wage as your next president, I will pledge to declare one war. It's not going to be some pointless foreign war. The real war I will declare is the war on our own shadow government right here at home. That's what we need out of the next commander-in-chief. Somebody who's willing to take on that 4th branch of government. If I can't work for you all for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, then neither should any of those federal bureaucrats reporting into me either. 8-year term limits for the bureaucracy instead of civil service protections. That's how you drain the swamp. 75% reduction in the number of federal bureaucrats by the end of my first term. We'll get 50% of that done, I believe, in the first month. Push me, I'll tell you how. Shut down government agencies that should not exist, from the ATF to the CDC to the FBI to the U.S. Department of Education. We will shut them down and reorganize them when necessary. Talk about the FBI. Is that practical? Does that mean we don't have federal law enforcement? Of course we will. The 15,000 agents on the front line, they're good people. Move them to the U.S. Marshals, which is much better at taking on child sex trafficking with expertise than the FBI has been, or to the DEA on the front lines of the fentanyl epidemic, or to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network at the U.S. Treasury, where they'll have greater specialization. But the 20,000 people sitting in the back office of the J. Edgar Hoover building in Washington, D.C., they're going to go home and find honest work in the private sector. So this is deeply practical. These aren't slogans to me. It takes a CEO in the White House to do this. Don't start with last year's budget as the baseline and then ask how you massage it around the edges. No. We're going to start with 0 as the baseline and ask what's actually necessary. This is how you fight the national debt. This is how you drain the swamp. They duped Trump on this, by the way. And I respect Donald Trump. I've been more complimentary of him than anybody else running for president because I respect him. But they duped him. They said that you can't fire those employees because they have civil service protections. Read the law. Those civil service protections only apply to individual employee firings. They do not apply to mass layoffs, and mass firings are absolutely what I am bringing to the D.C. bureaucracy. You see, this is why I'm in this race. My faith, I told you what my faith teaches me. We're here for a purpose, each of us. And we have a duty to realize that purpose, to use our God-given gifts. We need 2 things in the next president. On one hand, we need an outsider. Somebody who's going to have sharp elbows, break things, break glass when necessary, and shut down and face down the deep state. Trump had that, I have that. But it's going to take an outsider who also actually understands the law and the Constitution in this country. And those two things don't usually go together, really. You got the academic law professor types. I've been through law school and everything else. You got that. On the one hand, they're not going to actually get it done. You got the business guy who might want to get it done, but you're going to be duped if you don't actually know the Constitution yourself. And so, yes, I'm in this race because I think we need a president who has both of those things and who has fresh legs from the next generation to reach and lead the new generation and remind them of number 10, which is that the U.S. Constitution is the strongest and greatest guarantor of freedom in human history. That's what we've forgotten in this country. That's what we need to revive. If I'm going to swear an oath to that Constitution as your next president, I better darn well know what it says. The First Amendment comes first. It says you have the right to speak your mind freely as long as I get to in return. You have the right to exercise your religion and practice your faith without the government getting in your way directly or indirectly as they're trying to today. Saying you can't get a loan because of the ESG movement if your church is on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of hate groups. No, that's unconstitutional. The Second Amendment is the one that protects the first. It's the one that puts the teeth into all of the other amendments, something that we forget in this country as well. So our founding fathers knew. It's what we've forgotten. And the standard I use is, would our founding fathers be proud of what they see today in this country? Or would they be appalled? I think they would be aghast at the country they see today. Thomas Jefferson was 33 years old when he wrote the Declaration of Independence. He invented the swivel chair while he was at it. We've lost that spirit in this country. There's a reason why these revivals, these revolutions are led by the next generation. I'm an old man compared to Thomas Jefferson, but a young man compared to most people running for U.S. president. That's what it's going to take now more than ever. Our generation, we are lost. We are starved for purpose and meaning, and it is my responsibility to fill that vacuum, to fill that hunger for purpose with the ideals that made this country great. Answer what it means to be an American. Revive the rule of law. Revive meritocracy, the pursuit of excellence. Revive actual free speech and open debate. Self-governance in this country. Revive those 1776 ideals that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. I believe those ideals still exist. I am running for president to revive them. E pluribus unum means from many, one. That's what we've lost. We were taught to celebrate our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all of the ways we're really just the same as Americans, bound by that common set of ideals. And here's how we're going to get it back. It's what I said at the very beginning. It's going to be by all of us starting to speak the truth in the open again. Say in public what you will say in private at the dinner table. Say it with a spine. Say it with conviction. Say it with respect. But part of respect is that you respect your neighbor enough to tell him what you actually think. That is what this campaign is about. Speaking the truth, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. Speaking the truth, not just to the Democrats on the other side, but speaking the truth right here to our own Republican Party, acknowledging our own failures and our own corruption too. That's what I've been doing on that debate stage. There's a reason why I'm the only candidate in this race who's able to say certain things. That we will pardon peaceful January 6th protesters in light of what we now know. That we will end the use of eminent domain to build that carbon capture pipeline across this state of Iowa. That we're going to stop spending our own money in Ukraine so some mid-level Ukrainian bureaucrats able to live a nicer lifestyle. That's really what's happening. But there's a reason why I'm the only candidate who's able to say it. As I said earlier, my biggest donor is me. That's what it's going to take. Somebody who's independent of that establishment. I don't report to them. I report to you, the people of this country. And if you want somebody who's going to get in there and speak truth to power and shut down the deep state, then vote for somebody who's going to speak the truth to you. That's what our founding fathers did in 1776, and that's how we won the American Revolution. That is how we are going to win the revolution of 2024. Thank you for coming out, guys. Appreciate you guys hearing my unstructured reflection this morning. Let's open this up this afternoon. Let me open this up, and let's have an open conversation, and I'm going to take your questions, sir. I see you're wearing a veteran hat. Did you serve this country?
Yes, I did.
Thank
and
you,
I was
sir.
proud to serve here and defend America. But I'm not proud of what I'm seeing with the generals now. Something's got to be done with those people.
Yes.
And I hate to hear all the time that we got the best military in the world and we don't use it. I fought, and I'm willing to fight again. And I want to see somebody use us.
Yes. Amen. And where did you serve, sir, if you don't mind me asking?
Vietnam.
Serve Vietnam. Thank you for your service. We need to remember that legacy and pass it on to the next generation, where we have a 25% recruitment deficit because young people don't want to serve a country they're taught to hate. And some of where they're taught to hate that country is coming from our own military. Says your next commander-in-chief, I'm going to clean house at the Pentagon. Good men and women serving up and down the military, but the top ranks of the Pentagon have been infested by this new woke smoke they're blowing. And I'll tell you why they're doing it, because it's deeper than that. It's not just the superficial stuff. We sent our sons and daughters to go die in places like Iraq and Afghanistan that weren't the right wars for us to be fighting. And you make mistakes. I'm not here to blame anybody, but we got to learn from those mistakes. The Taliban is still in charge 20 years later. Iraq is still a broken country, vulnerable to Iranian incursion 20 years later. So here's what happened. I want to just, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Mark Milley, the General Mark Milleys of the world, they used to take criticism from the left for those wars. So here's what they made a kind of a side deal to say, okay. We'll deflect that criticism as long as we talk about systemic racism and white rage. And so the left stopped criticizing them for the Iraqs and the Afghanistans of the world, but they got to blow woke smoke to deflect accountability for their own failure. By the way, the same thing's happening in every area of American life. Our public schools fail to teach those black kids in the inner city how to do math, then just say math is racist. So it's the same trick they play everywhere, but the military's playing that same trick. I'm not going to let them get away with it. We're going to clean house at the Pentagon. We're also going to do a better job of taking care of our veterans. This is one of the ways we send a signal to the next generation. And it's not just because people like you deserve it, sir. Even if you told me that wasn't important to you, I'm going to tell you it's important to me and important to this country, because we have to show the next generation that we actually do value the people who have served. They see what we do. Our actions speak louder than our words. You shouldn't have to drive 100 miles to get to the nearest VA. You should be able to get community-based medical care. That shouldn't be controversial. Veterans should be able to treat their PTSD with true medical choice, not just restricting to what the VA gives them. Should have privacy restrictions to be able to report their PTSD, not in fear of getting tagged with the red flag law. These are basic decompression buffers after you come back from combat. 6 weeks we could give you to be able to at least adjust and reacclimate before being thrust back into civilian life with workforce training and otherwise. I think the veterans should be like the shareholders of the VA. In corporate America, shareholders set the pay of the CEO and the CFO and decide whether they get hired or fired. Well, how about if we did that for the veterans with the people who run the VA? We'd have a lot better service to our own veterans. These are not black ideas or white ideas. These aren't even Democrat ideas or Republican ideas. They're American ideals. And I think every American should be able to get behind both strengthening our military, so God forbid we need to use it, that we're able to use it and win, and to revive that national pride, including in the next generation, by standing for those who already have served in that military like you, sir. So thank you for that. I appreciate that question, and I thank you for your service. Go right here. Thank you.
Yes, I really like your idea of freedom of speech and respect while you are speaking. Could you give us a little nuanced legal talk about that? Because you can't just say anything like yell fire in a theater or slander. I can't slander you in public. How does this
Yeah.
work? Because I think people in this country are very uncivilized with their speaking to each other. They're rude.
That's right.
And would you kind of talk about the legal aspects of that?
Absolutely happy to do that. Thank you. What's your name?
My name is Andrea.
Andrea, very good question. Because we live in a moment where there are voices both on the left and in the Republican Party that are now hostile to free speech. Certain other candidates in this race, in the Republican primary, have said that in order to be able to post on the internet, you have to use a government-issued ID. That's what they want to see. No, I disagree with that. Our founding fathers, actually, these pamphlets are based off of Thomas Paine's Common Sense, okay? He wrote that under pseudonym. So did countless of our founding fathers. So anyway, we live in a moment where people, sometimes we've got to remember the first principles. Let me give you the punchline. You're right, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. I can't sell you a medicine tube saying it's going to cure your cancer, but it actually kills you. That's commercial fraud. I can't say, hey, go kill that person over there. Can't say that. That's a direct, clear, and present danger, incitement of violence. So here's the bright line rule. The easiest way to know this about what the First Amendment protects. All opinions are protected. No matter how heinous the opinion, if you're expressing an opinion, it's protected speech. That's the answer. So I can give you a lot of legal mumbo-jumbo to go along with that, but that's the punchline. I had an English teacher. She said if you can't explain it to a high school student, then you don't know what you're actually trying to say. So I try to hold myself to that standard. I can take the American flag outside and burn it and chant death to America. Is that honorable behavior? No, it is not. And I will condemn it with every bone in my body. But I will also fight with every bone in my body for your right to do it. Because that is actually what that flag represents. That's what makes America great. That's what makes America itself. That's in the First Amendment for a reason. And so I don't care whether the threats to free speech are coming from the Democrats, as they have for the last 5 to 10 years, or increasingly from Republicans as well. We are a country where the government should have no role in saying what opinions can and cannot get expressed. And I don't care if that's a popular position or not. I would rather speak the truth and lose an election than to win by playing some political snakes and ladders. But we live in a moment where you're right. We need to remember that's what the First Amendment was all about, the ability for you to express your opinion without any government or state actors standing in your way. Great question. Appreciate that. Last question? Okay. Go ahead.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you for spreading so much truth, because I think you say a lot of things that need to be heard. A thing I've never heard you speak about, what is your take on the vax and Operation Warp Speed? And then, what would you have done March 2020?
Sure, and I think that I want to frame this not as blaming anybody, but to learn for the future, what are we going to do? The people I will blame are people who broke the law, like Anthony Fauci and others who have used our taxpayer money to illegally fund the creation of a virus that wouldn't have otherwise been allowed to use our taxpayer money for here, gain-of-function research, and then they lied about it. So the two things we learned from the pandemic is free speech is most important in times of so-called emergency. And the second thing is medical choice is paramount. So here's what we've learned. I was dead set against it at the time. I'm dead set against it now. Any form of vaccine mandate. If it really has its own value proposition, you should be able to persuade people on the merits. You shouldn't have to force them to use it. And the same federal government and its FDA that says you have to wait 10 years before a new therapy is approved to be able to use it is also the same one that says you have no choice but not to use this vaccine that they've rushed out in 9 months. That doesn't make sense. I go the other way. You should have the right to try something. If you have a disease, even if FDA has not approved it, you should have the right to try it if you know the risks going in yourself. But you should also have the right not to try something just because the FDA has approved it. So that's where I am on that. I think that what's really shameful is that the government lied to us and censored any speech or debate along the way. That's the number one learning from that COVID-19 pandemic. And you want to know where we're seeing that happening all over again now? is in the climate emergency. Right? It's right after COVIDism, you have climatism. It's no accident. So I think that history is going to repeat itself unless we actually learn those lessons. Did you have something to add to that, ma'am? Okay. Immigration. Let me just address it briefly. Illegal versus legal. Great question, because that's the harder question. The easy stuff I could tell you, and I've talked about this extensively, use our military to seal the border, use aquatic barriers, end birthright citizenship is one thing I would do in response to your question. Anybody who's born in this country of illegal migrants should not enjoy birthright citizenship in this country. Read the 14th Amendment. That's something that the authors of the 14th Amendment never intended. But then anybody who is in this country illegally, anybody, will be returned to their country of origin. That has to be the only right answer. Sometimes being a parent is what gives me my moral clarity, right? I can't tell my two sons they have to follow the rules if our own government isn't following its own rules. So then the question is how? So they'll say that, oh, it's impossible. There's only 6,000 ICE agents, but there's millions who are here. This is where it takes a president who, yes, is a businessman coming from the outside, willing to break things, that's fine, but also somebody who knows the law and uses it. There's a section called 287G. It's current law. I don't need a new law from Congress. As your next president, I can use this. That allows ICE agents to delegate to local law enforcement the ability to serve those warrants for illegals who are in this country illegally. Yeah. To what end? Who also aren't paying who also aren't paying any of those taxes. So that's the answer. If you're in this country illegally, it goes back. You go back to your country of origin, period, without exception. They'll tell you we can't do it. I just gave an example of absolutely how we can do it. The country that put a man on the moon can get this done. This isn't a technical challenge. 30 seconds, man, before they drag me out, real quick. You want to go?
You mentioned something earlier in your speech about trust and crony capitalism as a general thing. For all the consolidation and everything of businesses inside the U.S. where the buyers' diversification of products are now dismal compared to what it used to be. And you got, like Vanguard, State Street, BlackRock, just dominating everything. How are we going to be able to fix that as a society and as a community in general?
So it's going to take multiple levels to do it. I mean, look, your own state pension fund money in Iowa is invested in BlackRock. I don't know if you knew that. Are you familiar with the last business I started or not really? It's this business called Strive. It competes directly with BlackRock. So I thought I wanted to solve these problems as an entrepreneur. I didn't think I was going to be running for president. Much more pleasant to do this as an entrepreneur. So I created a competitor to BlackRock, which said we're not going to use that money to advance these one-sided social and environmental agendas. And you know what? That crossed over $1 billion in assets under management in its first year after launching the first fund. So I believe in taking on bureaucracies and winning. My biotech company that developed drugs that Big Pharma refused on, we took on the bureaucracy of Big Pharma and won. But the root cause of all of this is actually the three-letter agencies in the federal government. They're the ones who are quietly using these large companies to achieve their own agendas through the back door that government could not achieve through the front door, and then they do special favors for the companies when they do. That's really what stops and stifles true competition in this country. And so the thing I've said is, first of all, as president, on day one, anytime a government actor has pressured a business to do something that the government couldn't do directly, we're going to publish it, and then we're going to hold that government actor to the fullest extent of the law accountable. That's illegal behavior and needs to be exposed. Elon did that at one company, at Twitter. That's happening company-wide, economy-wide. That's going to happen on day one of my watch.
But do you think that there's a possibility of actually having another trust-busting type presidency where they just go in and just start breaking everything?
I think yes, but I think you got to be careful with the thing we really need to break is the backdoor government linkage. I mean, that's really, when you talk about big tech censorship, that's an area where this comes up, right? We need a president who sees what's really going on. It's not quite big tech censorship. It's not. It's government tech censorship, where the government is using those big companies that have their monopolies to silence speech that the government couldn't itself censor directly. With BlackRock, the same problem. Couldn't pass the Green New Deal? No problem. Use government pension money, give it to BlackRock to be able to accomplish the Green New Deal through corporate America's boardrooms with emissions caps that people didn't want to vote for with your own money. That's what it's going to happen. So that's really where the essence of the problem is. And I say that because even smaller venture capitalists in Silicon Valley are doing the same thing. So just because big is bad, you might actually have the same problem 1,000 times over through small institutions too. The real problem is it's the government's, it's not the invisible hand of the market. It is the invisible hand of government. That's really what's going on. And so get to that root cause first, and I think you're going to see competition restored. And then I'm also in favor of ending lobbying. I don't think you should lobby the government if you've left the government. I don't think if you're, and I don't care if you're a Democrat or you're Nikki Haley or anybody else, you should not join the board of a company like Boeing or any other, or Pfizer or any other, that you're regulating when you're in your seat as a regulator. That's corruption. It needs to end. You should not be trading stocks of individual companies while you're in Congress or while you're a bureaucrat. These are basic anti-corruption measures that we're missing in this country right now. And the beauty of this is these aren't even Democrat ideas or Republican ideas. This should be the stuff of a landslide election in 2024. So if you all do your part, you make me your nominee. I'm going to do my part. It's my job to deliver you a landslide like what Reagan delivered in 1980. And that sounds about as ridiculous for me to say today as it did for Reagan in December of 79. That's the truth. A guy like me isn't supposed to do this. The system isn't set up for it. The Republican establishment does not approve of this message. That's the truth. Ronna McDaniel, the failed chairwoman of the RNC, who I called on to resign. I'm the only person who could actually utter it. Why? No other candidate can say it. Ask yourself why. Well, she said that I won't get another cent of funding from the RNC. Fine. I don't report to them. I report to you. I'm here to ask you for your help. You want to be a precinct captain? Please be one for us. Volunteer with us for the next 40 days. We are going to deliver a shock in Iowa because many of the people who are our supporters have never caucused in recent years. They're not polled. So we're going to shock the world here on January 15th. I think we're going to win the Iowa caucus. And for the same reason we're going to win the Iowa caucus, we're also going to win the general by a landslide because a lot of those are independents or America First, but not necessarily traditional Republicans or even libertarians who support this message. Great. That's the coalition we need to deliver that landslide. So I'm asking you for your help. And if you all do your part, I promise you, my wife Apurva and I and our family, we're going to do ours to make sure that we're not a nation in decline. To make sure we're not at the end of the ancient Roman Empire. But to make sure that we are still a nation in our ascent. And I'm not saying this some cheesy politician way. I'm not going to be the guy who walks in here and tells you the American dream is alive and well, because it's not. It's alive and hanging on by life support. It feels good to come in here and tell you it's morning in America. It's not. But it can be. I think this is our last chance to do it. If my two sons are in high school before we get this right, I don't think we have a country left. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. It's not a convenient time in our life to be doing this, but I think we want a president who's doing this not to make money or anything else, but to serve this country. So yes, if you all do your part on January 15th, 30 minutes of your time to save this country, 30 minutes of your time every week between now and then to spread the message to 100 people in this community, that's what I'm asking you to do. Sign up with us. Our team will help you do whatever you need to do to spread this message. If you all do your part, I promise you Apurva and I will do ours to make sure that our country's best days are actually, truly, just in a true way, still ahead of us. Thank you for coming out today, guys. God bless you. God bless your families. And may God bless our United States of America. Thank you.